On May 15th, 1536, inside the Tower of London, Anne Boleyn waited for a verdict. Queen of England, wife of Henry VIII, mother of the king's only legitimate daughter. By the end of the trial, she was condemned for treason, adultery, and incest, charges many historians still regard with deep suspicion. But the man who presided was not the king. It was Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, Lord High Steward, one of England's most powerful nobles, and Anne's own uncle. The family line that had helped carry Anne toward the crown now led to the official who pronounced her sentence. This is not a curse story or palace gossip. It is an investigation into a Tudor world where blood could open the palace door and, when the king's favor turned, help close it behind you. Before the family trail widens, two truths have to stay on the board. Henry VIII was not a passenger. He was the king. His will shaped the marriages, annulments, imprisonments, courts, and deaths. No family faction could force him to marry a woman he did not choose, and no uncle or father had more power than the crown. But Henry did not rule in an empty room. His court ran on access. Who could reach him, serve near the queen, ride beside him on a hunt, or profit when one woman rose and another fell? The Boleyns, Howards, Seymours, ambassadors, reformers, and conservatives all understood that marriage to Henry was politics. It meant religion, land, office, inheritance, and survival. That is the machinery, not a clean conspiracy, and not an excuse for Henry, but a system where ambitious relatives could help lift a woman toward the throne, then step back, or assist the process against her, when royal favor turned poisonous. To see why that choice could seem possible, we need the world that made daughters and nieces so valuable. In early Tudor England, a noble daughter could become a bridge into the most guarded room in the kingdom. The dynasty was still young. Henry's father had taken the crown after the Wars of the Roses, and everyone at court knew what a weak succession could bring: rival claims, armed factions, and foreign pressure. A surviving son was not only Henry's private obsession, it was treated as national insurance. That made royal marriage intensely political. A queen could tie England to Spain, France, or the Holy Roman Empire. She could strengthen Rome's influence or become the center of a religious fight. Her household filled with relatives, servants, chaplains, and allies. Every appointment created access. Access was the real currency. If your daughter served in the Queen's chambers, she might be seen by the king. If she gained his attention, her brothers might receive offices, her father might rise in council, and her uncle might gain leverage over policy, land, and patronage. But the same corridor led toward danger. A woman close to Henry was close to pregnancy, gossip, religion, diplomacy, and treason law. A pregnancy could become evidence. A sentence at dinner could be repeated by enemies. A chamber could be searched. When favor collapsed, relatives who had benefited from her rise faced a brutal calculation: protect her and risk falling with her, or step away and prove loyalty to the king. This is the market Anne Boleyn later entered, but the first woman to show how dangerous it could become was Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, because with Catherine, the question of a queen's body became a crisis for the state. With Catherine, the danger began not with scandal, but with legitimacy. Catherine of Aragon was no disposable courtier. She was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, widow of Henry's older brother Arthur, and a living bridge between Tudor England and one of Europe's strongest dynasties. Her marriage to Henry rested on ceremony, diplomacy, papal permission, and the hope that the Tudor line would look permanent. For years, Catherine embodied that hope. She had political experience, deep religious conviction, and public authority as a rightful queen. During Henry's war with France, she served as regent in England, while an English army defeated the Scots at Flodden. But the marriage produced only one surviving child, Mary. A daughter could inherit in theory, but England remembered civil war, and rival bloodlines. For Henry, the absence of a surviving son became a political emergency. So he tried to end the marriage. His argument was legal and religious. Marriage to his brother's widow had violated biblical law, so the papal dispensation should never have stood. Catherine answered that her marriage to Arthur had not been consummated, and that her marriage to Henry was lawful before God. The dispute pulled in Rome, Spain, imperial diplomacy, bishops, lawyers, universities, and parliament. When the Pope would not grant the annulment Henry wanted, Henry's government began breaking the old chain connecting English marriage law to papal authority. The result was not simply a king changing wives. It was royal supremacy over the English church. Catherine pushed from power, Mary's status challenged, and every future marriage placed inside a system Henry had remade for his succession crisis. Into that broken space stepped Anne Boleyn, and a family ready to gamble that the new rules could lift them higher than the old ones ever had. The family making that gamble already knew how power worked. Anne Boleyn came from the Boleyns through her father, Thomas Boleyn, a skilled courtier and diplomat, and from the Howards through her mother, Elizabeth Howard. That mattered. The Howards were among England's great noble families, and Anne's uncle, Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, stood near the top of the aristocracy Henry still needed, even as he broke with Rome. Anne herself was more than a name carried by powerful men. She had spent formative years in the Netherlands and France, learning the language, manners, and instincts of elite European courts. At Henry's court, she did not behave like a temporary mistress. She refused to become another royal convenience. She held out for marriage, and that changed the stakes. As Henry's pursuit deepened, the Boleyn rise became visible. Thomas Boleyn became Viscount Rochford, then Earl of Wiltshire and Ormond, and received major diplomatic work, while his daughter's future became a matter of state. Anne's brother George also rose through court favour and became closely identified with the Boleyn world. This was court advancement in motion. A daughter's place near the king opened doors for her father, brother, allies, and Howard kin. Religion made it more charged. Anne was linked with reform-minded books, clerics, and arguments supporting Henry's supremacy against papal authority. To supporters of Catherine and Mary, the Boleyns looked like the human face of a dangerous new order. In 1533, Anne became queen. That year, she gave birth to Elizabeth. A daughter was not nothing. Elizabeth was a Tudor heir, but Henry had broken with Catherine, challenged Rome, and unsettled the kingdom because he wanted a secure male succession. Anne's position still depended on the future arriving in the form Henry wanted. By early 1536, Catherine was dead, Anne had suffered another failed pregnancy, and Henry's attention was moving elsewhere. Offices and titles did not vanish overnight. On paper, the family tree still looked strong. But protection at Henry's court lasted only while the king wanted it to last. When Anne's political value began to collapse, the machinery moved fast. In spring 1536, Henry had a possible replacement in view, Jane Seymour, whose family was already gathering around the opening Anne's fall would create. Then came the charges. Anne was accused of adultery with several men and incest with her brother George Boleyn. The accusations were framed as treason because if the Queen's body had been unfaithful, the king's heirs and honour were said to be under attack. Many historians treat the case as deeply suspect. The dates are strained, the politics are obvious. Then the charges existed, and the machinery began to sort people by loyalty. Anne's father, Thomas Boleyn, did not appear as a heroic shield between his children and the king. His name was connected to the commission that tried the men accused with Anne. His son George was condemned. Whatever Thomas believed privately, the public record shows a father surviving, while the case consumed both his daughter and his son. Then the family record turns colder. Anne and George, as nobles, were tried before peers. Presiding as Lord High Steward was Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, Anne's uncle. In that role, Norfolk oversaw the court that found her guilty and pronounced sentence. This does not prove Anne's relatives planned her destruction from the beginning. It shows something nearly as chilling. When Henry's will hardened, family connection could be converted into legal procedure. Men who had benefited from Anne's rise now stood inside the system that erased her. No one there needed to be told what open resistance might cost. To defend a woman accused of betraying the king was to risk being pulled into treason. Silence became survival. Office became obedience. Blood became paperwork. By the time Anne was taken to the Tower, the Boleyn gamble had failed at the center. The court did not pause. It turned toward the next household, already waiting near the king. After Anne, the court did what it was built to do. It redistributed access. As Anne's name was being scraped out of the future, Jane Seymour's was being written in. Jane had served in the households of both Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, so she knew the palace from inside, its rooms, rules, and sudden changes of favor. Within days of Anne's execution, Jane married Henry. We do not have to prove that Jane or the Seymours engineered Anne's death to see what happened next. The reward structure is visible. Jane became queen. Her brothers, Edward and Thomas Seymour, rose with her. In October 1537, Jane gave Henry the outcome that had driven so much of the crisis: a living son, Prince Edward. For the Seymours, this was the dream version of the gamble. A woman near the king became mother of the male heir. Her family was attached to the succession itself. But even success carried a cost. Jane died shortly after childbirth, and her family's influence continued through the child she left behind. In Tudor politics, a queen's body could create a dynasty even as it destroyed her. Then the red line bent back to the Howards. After Henry's failed marriage to Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, young, aristocratic, and connected to the same Howard network as Anne Boleyn, became his fifth wife. For conservative figures at court, her rise offered a way back toward influence after the Cleves marriage had strengthened rivals. Catherine's case shows the darker half of the pattern. She was a young woman inside a household and court culture controlled by older relatives, patrons, and men whose careers depended on royal access. When allegations about her past and conduct reached Henry, Howard Advantage became Howard Emergency. Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, the uncle who had presided over Anne Boleyn's trial, moved quickly to separate himself from Catherine. In letters to Henry, he condemned her behavior in the strongest terms, presenting himself not as a protector of his niece, but as a loyal servant horrified by her. Again, that does not prove a plan to destroy her from the beginning. It shows the mechanism under pressure. When a queen brought honor, her family stood near the throne. When she brought danger, distance became proof of loyalty. Jane Seymour and Catherine Howard are opposite outcomes of the same system, one family elevated by an heir, another scrambling away from scandal. The rhyme remembers who died and who was beheaded. The records show the machinery underneath. When all six wives come back into view, the simple rhyme starts to break open. The women who were not executed were not simply more innocent, more obedient, or morally luckier. Catherine of Aragon was not beheaded. But survival did not mean safety. After Henry forced the end of their marriage, Catherine was pushed from power, denied the title of queen, and separated from Mary. Her foreign birth, her nephew the emperor, and the danger of killing a Spanish princess all shaped what Henry could do. She lived, but she was isolated. Anne of Cleves shows another kind of survival. Her marriage was tied to diplomacy with German Protestant allies. When Henry wanted out, the ending came through annulment, not execution. Anne accepted the settlement and was rewarded with houses, income, and the public status of the king's beloved sister. That was not romance. It was a negotiated retreat. Catherine Parr survived Henry himself, but even she was not beyond danger. Near the end of his reign, her religious interests and reformist sympathies brought hostile scrutiny. A warrant for her arrest was reportedly prepared. Her escape depended on timing, careful submission, and persuading Henry that her religious arguments had only been meant to distract him from pain and learn from his wisdom. So the rhyme works as memory. It fails as explanation. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. Those words flatten succession anxiety, foreign diplomacy, religious faction, family calculation, legal invention, and royal will. The queens were wives, but also pressure points. A family could promote one, a faction could use one, a king could discard one. And when the pressure became too great, the safest move for people around her was often to step back and let the crown decide her fate. That is the part the rhyme cannot hold. The crown did not only punish enemies, it trained the people closest to it to calculate when love, blood, and loyalty had become liabilities. For a noble family, a daughter near Henry could mean offices, estates, marriages, and a place at the center of the realm. The same daughter, under accusation, could become a firebreak, someone the family had to separate from before royal anger spread to them. That does not make every relative a monster, or every decision a conspiracy. It makes the Tudor court colder, a world where survival depended on reading the king's fear before it reached your own door. Anne Boleyn's uncle could sit in judgment. Catherine Howard's uncle could denounce her. Anne of Cleves could live by accepting public demotion. Catherine Parr could survive by turning danger into submission. Different outcomes, same force at the center. Henry's will was that center of force. Around him stood families, counselors, bishops, ambassadors, and rivals, all learning how to benefit from a queen's rise and endure her fall. The tragedy of Henry's wives is not only that private women were pulled into public power, it is that the people who knew them best often understood the rules most clearly. Proximity gave power, proximity carried danger, and in the shadow of the Tudor crown, betrayal did not always begin with hatred. Sometimes it began with ambition, sometimes with fear, sometimes with a family deciding that the only way to survive the king was to let one of their own stand alone.